the animals destitute of organs which serve the others for talking, are nevertheless in the habit of themselves inventing certain signs by which they make themselves understood by those being usually in their company. And this does not merely show that the animals have less rational capacity than we do, but that they have none at all. Then he goes on to say that, well, sometimes we see animals behave in certain ways, show signs of pain when they get hurt. And so we are tempted to think, well, maybe they have a soul too, just maybe a soul of a lower kind, but still some kind of a soul like we do. And Descartes says, well, in principle, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But when I see some animals, such primitive forms of animal life, such as oysters or sponges, they can't have a soul. And if they don't, then no animal has a soul. We'll see this kind of generalization will be an important issue later in the debate over animal rights. Let me read. He says, well, I know that animals do many things better than we do, but this does not surprise me. It can even be used to prove they act naturally and mechanically, like a clock, which tells the time better than our judgment does. And then he goes on to say, as I just said, that some animals, well, behave in a way that makes us think that they have a soul. He says, well, the most that one can say is that though the animals do not perform any action which shows us that they think, still, since the organs of their body are not very different from ours, it may be conjectured that there is attached to those organs some thoughts, such as we experience in ourselves. So maybe there are some thoughts in there, such as we experience in ourselves, but of a very much less perfect kind, to which I have nothing to reply, except that if they thought as we do, they would have an immortal soul, like us. This is unlikely, because there is no reason to believe it of some animals without believing it of all. And many of them, such as oysters and sponges, are too imperfect for this to be true. Okay, this is Descartes' position. Let me move on now to another position, which is that of Immanuel Kant, the 18th century German philosopher, so central to Western philosophy, modern Western philosophy. Now, Kant also supports the indirect duty position of animal rights. And let me just read an excerpt from one of his works, which pretty much illustrates his point. He says, we have no direct duties to animals. Animals are not self-conscious and are there only as a means to an end. This end is man. Our duties to animals are merely indirect duties to mankind. Animal nature has analogies to human nature, and by doing our duties to animals in respect of manifestations of human nature, we indirectly do our duties to humanity. Thus, for example, if a dog has served his master long and faithfully, on the analogy of human service, the dog deserves reward. And when the dog has grown too old to serve, his master ought to keep him until he dies. Such action helps to support us in our duties toward human beings, where they are bounden duties. We have duties towards the animals because thus we cultivate the corresponding duties towards mankind. Tender feelings towards dumb animals develop humane feelings towards humans. So, yes, when your dog or your horse that have served you faithfully and for a long time grow old, you should keep them. You should treat them well, but not because they have any right to be treated well, but because by doing that, you learn how to behave well with other humans. You see, again, the indirect duty, the indirect obligation kind of perspective. The animal itself has no rights. You treat the animal well because by doing so, you shape yourself into a nicer person to other people. Not that the animal matters at all. What matters is other people. So the animal is there as an instrument to train you morally into treating well other people. That's Kant's position, okay? Immanuel Kant's position. Now let me move on to Michael Fox. Now we move on into the 20th century, okay? So we go from the 18th century to the second half, the later part of the 20th century. Michael Fox. Michael Fox is the author of this book called The Case for Animal Rights, for Animal Experimentation. The Case for Animal Experimentation. The title mimics the name of another book, an important book in this debate, which is called The Case for Animal Rights. So this happens usually. An author will kind of mimic the title of another book, implying that there is a response or a counter-argument to it. Michael Fox writes this book in support of animal experimentation, which is to say against animal rights, because if we can experiment with animals, that means animals do not have rights. If we can cut them to pieces and do all kinds of things to them, then they don't really have rights. Let me read to you what Michael Fox says at the very outset of his book, in the introduction. He says that he is going to write this book so as to develop a reasonable position in support of what most human beings have believed and practiced for thousands of years. That animals are not our moral equals, and that therefore there is no compelling ground for treating them as such. Now, what do you guys think of this statement in the introduction to his book? Any comments? Well, I'll tell you, what it seems to me is that if I were to find this kind of a statement when reading a book that is supposedly an exploration of an ethical issue, is abortion right or wrong, or is animal rights, do animals have rights or they don't, or is the death penalty right or wrong? And if I'm going to read a book, let's say on the death penalty, and the first line I find in the book is, well, I don't care whether it's right or wrong. I'm going to write this book in support of the death penalty because that's what most people have believed for hundreds of years. Or I'm going to write this book against the death penalty because that's what progressive people believe. Well, my first reaction would be, wow, this is not an objective book, right? This is not a book that's going to be impartial, that's going to show me, the pros and the cons, all kinds of arguments, and that impartially, objectively, insofar as that's possible, he's going to try to lead me into some conclusion. He's just going to develop a rationale, a justification, no matter what, for what most humans have believed and practiced for thousands of years. That is to say that animals don't have rights. That's the purpose of the book. I would say that's not a good book. Would you agree with me on that? I think that's pretty much everyone's feeling. Then he talks about the moral community, of course, and he says he establishes a number of requirements for membership in the moral community, meaning for you to have rights. What are the requirements for some individual to have moral rights? The right to live, the right to have one's well-being and welfare taken care of and respected. What are the conditions for that? Well, these are the conditions, okay? They must be beings that are capable of functioning within one, meaning autonomously. They must have critical self-awareness, the ability to manipulate complex concepts and to use a sophisticated language, and the capacity to reflect, plan, deliberate, choose, and accept responsibility for acting. Well, that's very demanding. I mean, I suspect not even many college students would be part of a moral community if we had to all meet these extremely high requirements, right? well, then